Welcome to St. Paul's Church, part of the parish of Harbour Grace, part of the Anglican Diocese of Eastern Newfoundland and Labrador, the oldest stone church in Newfoundland for sure, and most of the Atlantic provinces, if not all of them. It is of a Gothic revival structure. It is shaped, as my daughter puts it, as a castle. And it has been here longer than almost any church in the Eastern Diocese, if not the whole of Newfoundland and Labrador. In this church, which is still active after just over 180 years now, it has been an active part of the community. It has been built upon still, and yet still maintains its structure, its integrity, and its historical value in the community, despite the additions that we have made over the years. So here we are in the chancel area, which is the sacred space in history, where basically the people of the congregation and only those who are allowed in the sacred space were allowed to be. It's reflective of, in the history of the church and in worship, that this was the sacred space where the altar and any other sacred items would dwell, so that during the communion service and any other service of the church, only those who are working with the altar and working with those elements would be found here. In this church, our sacred space is divided with a kneeling rail, an altar rail as it can be called. The altar rail is very ornate as well, very old. It's so old, in fact, that there are spaces where the gas lights used to be, because this place had very different lighting over the course of its history, candles, gas lights, and eventually electric over the course of the years. In this space as well are many of our ornamental items, such as the newest, which would be the bishop's chair, which the rector would sit in when he is not here, or she. And the major two are two chairs which were donated by George Mackinson back in 1865. And they were donated and brought handmade and carved from India. And they are still here. The only thing that has been done with them most recently is they've been reupholstered. But aside from that, they are the same chairs that have been there the whole time. As well, there is a small credence table. The credence table is used during the service to hold the elements that we use for communion. That would be such as the bread, the wine, and all the other elements that we would have. That table has been there for a long time. It was donated by one of the former rectors, Reverend Higgett, in memory of an officer from the Flying Corps in 1917 who passed away, an officer by the name of Coombs, Cecil Coombs. And that table is the same since then as well. And now I'm standing behind the altar itself. Now the altar and the reedros, which is right behind it, are two very important symbols of the church. They are not as old as the church, but they have been refurbished. Originally, in 1959, this was here, and this altar was not actually in front of me, it was behind me. I would have been doing a rear-facing service. I would have been conducting communion facing away from the congregation, which is our old tradition, is the way that comes from an Anglo-Catholic faith, our original way of doing things. It is still upheld in our cathedral out in St. John's. For their stone altar is right into the wall and does not move. This one, however, in 1959, was a part of this reedros, and it was decorative, and it was all one piece. They had been separated and then refinished in 1972, I believe, and it was during that time that the altar was moved out, and now we conduct service facing the congregation, which is the more modern and common practice today. In 1877, on October the 6th, the parish installed a pipe organ made by Chapel and Company of Liverpool, England. The organ was originally powered manually by manpower, someone going behind to push on the bellows themselves, and which are still there, but now since 1948 it has been electrically operated. There was a special evensong held 100 years later in 1977 on October the 16th to celebrate the 100th anniversary of that pipe organ. In 2001, the church organ was in need of a major restoration, but since then it has been restored through a significant contribution of our parishioners, and it is still the oldest working pipe organ in Newfoundland and Labrador. This is the memorial pulpit in our church. This is from where the sermons are read, and also the gospel most commonly. This is where it is all preached from. It was originally during the time of Reverend William Higgett, and it was dedicated on August 26, 1921. The pulpit was erected by the parents and friends to record the services of men in this parish who served during World War I between the times of 1914 and 1918. They were the people who passed away, sacrificed themselves during that war. There is a tablet, as a matter of fact, a brass tablet that originally was affixed to this pulpit, which we now have in the back of our church on the wall, right next to our door. And it is on that tablet that bears the names of all those who lost their lives and for whom this is dedicated. It is on the west wall of our church, and it is seen every time we come in and every time we exit, as we are grateful for that memorial that is part of this church.
Here we are now at the font of St. Paul's, and it's been here since 1862, which means that many people have a personal relationship with it. Not only have they been baptized in this font, or at this font, their ancestors have also been baptized at this font, which is a wonderful memory kind of thing. It's also important to note that it's at the very front of the door when you come in, and it's a symbol of the renewness of life through water. Once again, we look at the coat of arms in St. Paul's Church, and it's just above the font here. And we're fortunate enough to be one of two churches with a coat of arms, and the other one being St. Thomas's Church in St. John's. And what it depicts really is the royal coat of arms, which is considered not to be church furniture, and therefore it isn't consecrated. And it was installed to the West Gallery in 1838. And really it establishes the fact that St. Paul's, like St. Thomas's Church in St. John's, was a garrison church. As you can see, this fine old church of St. Paul's has the Stations of the Cross, but it always didn't have the stations until 2014, when the family of Basil and Mary and Bob Martin, from their children, Betty, Tom, and Don, donated the Stations of the Cross. And but before that, what used to bother me was every Easter we'd have the Stations of the Cross from time to time, and you'd see a facsimile of the stations on a piece of paper just stuck to the posts along the church, and to me that wasn't good enough. So I said to Reverend Moses at one point, next year we'll have the Stations of the Cross. And that was 2013, and we donated them in 2014. And as you can see, the stations, the number of stations include 14, and it depicts the judgment of Jesus and right up to his resurrection, which includes the 15th station. Now, not all churches have the whole 15 stations, but we're fortunate enough that we donated the whole 15 stations. So on Easter, we come back on that glorious morning, and we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus as we're gathered under that particular station. As you can see, as depicted here, is our own belief of faith, taken from the Apostles' Creed, and the words that our Lord has taught us, the Lord's Prayer. And these metal tablets, they depict the Lord's Prayer and also the Ten Commandments. And nothing is recorded, though, which is unfortunate, of the origin or the donor. The tablets here at St. Paul's were installed about 1860, and they were placed on the north and south of the east wall of the transept. But later in 1877, in order to make room for the organ, the tablet bearing the Lord's Prayer and the Apostles' Creed, however, was divided and placed on the south and north walls of the transept. As you can see, the women of the church always contributed to St. Paul's Church, and they did so again in 1860 when these 3 stained glass windows in the chancel were installed in 1860, when the transepts added to the nave of the church were completed. And as the inscription of the central window states, these 3 windows were given by the young women of the parish. Once again, a statement to the work of the women of St. Paul's Church. This wonderful church bell, a bell that we've heard all of our lifetimes, and our ancestors have also heard of it all of their lifetimes, which also gives us a common chord. The bell came from Liverpool, England in 1838, and it was bought by some local merchants, Ridley and Sons. A new bell, purchased in 1901, became cracked, however, in 1912 and had to be replaced. But true to faith, Mrs. R.D. McCrae, a member of the congregation, paid the cost of the replacement bell. And again in 1936, the bell became cracked and had to be recast again. The recasting of the bell was a gift from St. Paul's CEWA and St. Catherine's Guild.